teamed up with CITEL to dive into a topic that's keeping a lot of people up at night: how to stay audit ready 24/7 in a world of tough regulations like NIS2, DORA, SOC 2, and ISO 27001. Unlike old school audits that check a moment in time, continuous compliance means that your organization has to be on point every day, monitoring controls, managing risks, and keeping things resilient. It's a big ask, but here's the exciting part. AI could make this easier with smart automation. Think real-time checks and less manual work. But can we trust it? Does it bring new risks like a black box that auditors hate? That's what we're unpacking today. I'm joined by an awesome panel who knows this stuff inside out. And we have Brett Hardman, the CISO of CAB Online Group. We have Daniel Schlegel, CISO at Berlitz Languages. And of course, we have Wesley Van Zyl at CITEL, sorry. They're here to share real-world stories about juggling multiple compliance frameworks. And I also should mention, Wesley's also a former auditor, so he can give us some inside information about what auditors look for when you're going through a ISO 27001, NIS2, or DORA framework. So today, in short, we'll be exploring how AI can simplify continuous compliance, where it might trip up, and how to blend it with human smarts for a winning strategy. So welcome, Brett, Daniel, and Wesley. So Wesley, to start things off, where do you see AI making life easier for compliance teams? Do you see it speeding up evidence collection or catching seam patterns? How do you see that?
Thank you for the introduction, Isabella. I'm thrilled to be here, and obviously with both Brett and Daniel, who I've worked with as well on some projects that we completed, specifically the ISO more recently. Yeah, to answer your question, I think from a compliance perspective, we're always looking, new ways to speed up the process, first of all, without sacrificing on quality, because of course quality should still be, at the forefront of any project when it comes to, enhancing your security, implementing frameworks and controls to show privacy. What you're doing around privacy with the data that you're storing. And then, of course, AI making a lot of noise, in the market these days, what is being done around AI. And of course, ISO standards always taking the lead with these things, brought out 42001, and now we have also the EU AI Act that's come into play. Look, so, the first thing that comes to mind, is looking at, typically like your policies and how you can have an AI agent built to scan, read these policies and identify any gaps, between what your policy says and what a particular framework or regulation would say. So for example, if, a specific regulation talks about encryption, encrypting your databases or whatever, it's going to look in a particular policy and see, do you mention this in your policy, and are you covering, the necessary control around encryption? And then maybe coming up with some sort of gap analysis saying, these are the gaps in your policies, this is what you need to do to fix it, and so on. So that's something we are already seeing in the market. It's something CITEL is going to implement soon. So that's like a big, a big time saver for any compliance manager, or any person that's taking the lead on compliance projects. And then from an inside point of view, of course, we've seen this a lot of AWS tools, GCP, Azure, just naming the big three, and then there's other tools outside your big three out there that are providing these insights, specifically from an incident management point of view. So identifying, patterns in incidents that's being picked up, eliminating false positives, and being much more reactive or proactive in, discovering these trends, and be able to provide the necessary controls, to implement the necessary controls to be a little bit more proactive instead of, having to deal with the alternative that there is a breach and now we need to implement controls and find out what happened, where you can be a little bit more proactive with the AI. Yeah, so that's pretty much in a nutshell where we see this coming from.
Well, you mentioned that AI can save time. You mentioned how Sitel does that. But what about AI, sorry, cutting costs? Like, are we talking about replacing a couple of staff doing this work already? Or is it really, are we still going to be needing the staff to looking through?
Yeah, to a certain degree, I believe, again, so talking in-house compliance teams, because we need to separate the external auditor coming in, looking at it from an auditor or from a third-party point of view. There's a couple of articles that I've seen on LinkedIn that, auditors starting to explore this idea of how AI is going to replace, the auditor in some way, because AI can still be seen as a third party, given you train this AI agent, in that way. But I mean, that is just opinions and speculation at this point. I personally think the auditor will still be there as a third party.
I think we read the same article.
Yeah. So, in terms of, cutting costs, again, time is money, and, most auditors, will be, maybe billing or, charging customers based on the hours spent or consulting hours spent in implementing a specific framework. So, if you have a tool that can rely or use AI to speed up some of, the processes of compliance, for example, I mentioned something like policy creation, insights into risk registers, one example I can give, is, and this might be a little bit more like towards the SMB side, type of companies, some startups and that sort of thing, but maybe bigger companies already have a much mature risk register, so putting my SMB hat on or startup hat on, you need to come up with these risk registers and do treatment plans and, assign owners and link controls, like what controls will mitigate these risks. And I mean, if you have an AI model trained, to do that for you, you will save a lot of time. Doesn't eliminate the human factor, because you would still, I mean, if I was, the, chief compliance officer, I would still have someone review what this AI did. I don't think I wouldn't trust, AI. And that's where the big difference come in, how much trust do we actually put on these AI modules or these AI agents? And I guess we can touch later on, the specifics around training these AI modules. But let me maybe stop there before I go on to a different direction.
Well, actually, that was a beautiful segue to ask Brett and Daniel. AI has been a win for your respective teams. Has it been spotting vulnerabilities, seeing third-party risks, or maybe even getting compliant? Let's start with you, Brett. What about you and Sitel? How has that been working with AI?
Yeah, so I mean, I think for me, there's a lot of different ideas about what it actually is, and I like to point out that in a lot of cases, what we're referring to as AI is probably more like old school automation, and I think that's an important thing to kind of remember here. When we're talking about like the LLMs and the sort of new and fancy kind of AI engines that are coming out, I kind of tend to agree with what Wesley on a lot of those points that, for me, they're really helpful to improve, let's say, to reduce the amount of time I spend reviewing legislation, reviewing policy documents. Also, like I'm based in Sweden, and my Swedish is good, but it's not great. So, even in just translating documents and being able to interpret things in a way that I can kind of rely on. So I do leverage AI tools to help with a lot of those types of things. But then when it comes to, compliance discussions, I mean, I think old school automation is really where the big wins are for me currently, at least. It's like we know that we need to, monitor the code review configurations and the practices, in our dev teams. We know that we need to monitor, whatever else it happens to be, and those things are really quite useful to have kind of an automated integration, the likes of which, Sitel actually sort of implements, that just says, I can get a report every morning, oh, these repos are no longer in compliance or something like that. And I can just go and delegate that work to someone. So, I mean, I think that's where the big wins are for me currently. There's a mix of automation and AI. I treat AI as an assistant, not a decision maker.
Yeah.
And I think that's for me, that's the real. I've been reviewing the AI Act a little bit over the last period of time here, and to me, I'm trying to distill the essence of this AI Act, and I think for me, and I don't know if I'm correct here or not, but for me, what I feel like is that it's really trying to force us to think about, you know, how much of our decision-making process are we willing to hand over to an untested statistical engine? I mean, and for
That
me, the
makes
answer, I'm very risk averse on things like that. I'm not willing to hand over much of the decision-making process. I wouldn't give my compliance program to an intern and say, make a bunch of decisions. And I'm treating AI at that type of level right now. I'm very willing to take the help, but not quite willing to turn over my decisions in that way. So
that makes perfect sense. I'm thinking AI, how AI can provide us with predictive analytics. So you combine machine learning and historical data to forecast potential risks as well. Like they could see, oh, there's a compliance gap coming up with this new regulation here. There might be some security threats, or as I mentioned earlier about the or as Wesley mentioned, actually, with the gap analysis as well. So AI can help us in that. But I agree with you, though, that maybe it's not so much a decision maker, but something that you can base your decision on. But there's a risk to that, too. I'm really keen to hear what you think about this, Daniel.
Yeah, I mean, I think AI is an assistant. It's a coworker that needs to be supervised. So there are a number of areas where it is absolutely helpful. Create efficiencies, especially at scale. And I think that's regardless if you're in a small team or a large team. So whether that be automated code scanning, doing predictive analysis in codes that go from development into or the repo into UAT, possibly doing another thing on the production push, whether there are anomalies, anything has changed. I mean, some of it is more basic automation, that has existed for some time, but it's evolving, right? You can do cross-check against, other repositories, against known vulnerabilities or some other areas, that I think that are very beneficial where a true AI actually really comes into the picture. But at the end of the day, whatever the output is, it still needs to be supervised. It's like to Wesley's point, you can analyze a lot, but at the end of the day, the auditor, someone needs to take a look and really puts, whatever the situation is, assess actually what's going on, whether the model and the agent really perform what they were supposed to do. Is it more of a false positive? Is it more, from a learning perspective, did it go against perhaps something that's not fully trained? I mean, certain things also take a little time, getting these agents, and the models to learn based on what you actually need. And obviously refining them, will help over time. I mean, I think there's a number of very good use cases when it comes to analyzing policies, procedures, refining them, spotting gaps in them. But at the same time, also, it really speeds up the process, creating new policies, right? When you look at, ISO 27001 versus SOC 2, where's the gap? What needs to be perhaps highlighted, refined, and what not, right? It goes both ways. So I think there's a lot of efficiencies that can be used out of those models, especially when you drive that to the bottom line. For us, it's very relevant, driving it against what budget means there are. And as a result of that, we can obviously do more with the same. And that makes a big difference, when scaling, rolling out platforms, going through this, the compliance aspects of everything, that we either have to deal with or want to deal with. Not everything is always a requirement, but perhaps it's good to have. And that's, I think, where is AI is a real driving factor. But at the end of the day, you need somebody directing it. And I think that's the key aspect here.
Absolutely. And when it comes to SOC 2, for example, you can imagine, I mean, SOC 2 audits, they require evidence, right? So if you have unexplained failures, that might delay your certification. But imagine you have your AI dashboard saying, oh, you have a SOC 2 control, like your encryption has failed, but it just won't show the maths behind it. And auditors, and now Wesley, you would know about this, you would need that clear evidence, and a black box that would just frustrate them, wouldn't it? So how do you get around that, Wesley and Daniel, with SOC 2 in particular?
I just want something for answer that question. So if you look at the EU AI Act and also ISO 42001, one of the areas or criteria that it talks about is human oversight. So, these frameworks recognize the risk that, if you want to introduce AI into your business in whatever way or form, there needs to be some sort of human oversight, whether you build in a knowledge base for a chatbot to answer questions, the logic behind the chatbot. It needs a human to review, what is it digesting from this knowledge base, and how is it responding? How is the logic built? How is it trained? Who has access to these modules? How is that managed? How are these models changed? So your traditional IT security frameworks built on proper access controls, change management, those kind of things is just being applied in the AI world, because at the end of the day, you're treating AI or this agent or tool as almost as a person, which you need to supervise, and you need to make sure that there's some sort of structure and process to follow, and not just, blindly relying on it. And maybe we do get to a place, maybe 5 years from now, we have it the same webinar and completely changed. And that's the thing at the moment. There's a lot of opinions about it. But maybe, Isabella, just repeat your question. I forgot the question. I got track.
So how would you say that you when a SOC audit requires documented evidence, right? And that the unexpected or unexplained failures could delay your certification. How do you get around that? How do you solve that black box issue?
Yeah. So I mean, of course, I haven't been auditing in a while now, with doing wonderful work with Sitel. So I've not been on that side of the fence in a while. But typically, an auditor looks at the evidence, and it has a criteria against which it compares it. And typically, if you look at an ISO and a NIST, the regulation says ABC, or SOC 2 says the control says encrypt databases, or ensure code is approved before being merged to production. That's the standard. It's black and white. That's clear. So you look at the evidence, and if it matches the control or the regulation, then it's a pass, right? So it requires that human judgment, human decision making, which I believe AI at the moment wouldn't be able to do it. Sure, some people will argue, and I spoke to one of my friends. He's also an entrepreneur himself, and he's like fascinated with building all of these like AI agents, training them, and making them like little humans in his company, where you can train these things to look at a screenshot, look at a document, look at evidence provided by the company, and coming up with a report or a tick that accept, reject, provide, new screenshot, unclear screenshot. And there's various approaches. You can go a risk-based approach. You can look at the controls and regulations, and based on auditors' experience, you can say, typically these areas are critical controls that requires human review. These areas are not that critical, and maybe we can rely on an AI agent reviewing these things a little bit more, So it comes back to cutting costs and cutting time, which we talked about earlier. But at the end of the day, the auditor needs to provide an opinion in the SOC 2 case, where they have reasonable assurance that what they reviewed satisfies the control. Whether you use AI to achieve that decision, the decision still relies on you or the partner that's signing the report. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
So the regulation itself is actually safeguarding to make sure that the audit will pass.
Yeah, I mean, it's built into built into these AI into the ISO 42001 and the EU AI Act. So it's there.
And Brett, I know you mentioned previously you think that maybe it's less AI, it's more intelligent automation. But say that you have a cloud provider, your AI scans your cloud provider and flags it low risk. Then it misses that your subcontractor incident response plan is outdated. Now that would be a huge NIS2 violation and a human audit, but do you think AI could miss it? And do you rather think that an AI would be better at finding subcontractors' incident response plans rather than a human? What do you think?
Sure, that's an interesting question. I mean, you know, for me, the answer is kind of neither. I think the right answer is a combination of both. I mean, I genuinely think that AI can enhance our actual intelligence and support our actual intelligence to kind of identify risks and deal with them. You know, I think the situation that you outlined, I mean, it's kind of anybody's guess if a real, you know, if an actual person would notice the gap, or if an AI would notice the gap. I think there's a risk in either situation that something gets overlooked, right? But I think if we're trying to achieve a world where we work together, you know, use the AI to, you know, automatically scan and consume large amounts of data. I think that's that's been ringing in my head here. That's what I really want to use AI for, to be able to consume and process large amounts of data more quickly to help me to make better decisions, right? And so, you know, I think it requires or ideally it would be a combination thereof. Yeah, I want to have tools that are looking. I mean, we've been doing this for years before AI was a term, right? I mean, you know, pattern recognition, you know, predictive analytics, statistical sort of modeling, things like this. I mean, insurance companies have been doing this since before the internet, right? So like this is really new stuff. It's just new and novel applications of it and faster applications of it, I think. So for me, the real money is like in kind of trying to find a way to combine those tools so that we can sort of improve our outcomes, you know, and make it more efficiently as well. So
CAB deals with, you mentioned data, and I fully agree with you on that one. But CAB Online in particular deals with a lot of PII data, a lot of privacy data. Do you think that using AI could cause a risk for GDPR breaches?
That's a great question, and it's something that we're looking into quite a lot. And yeah, I mean, I think there's risk if you have an untrained AI agent pointed at your data stores. Yeah, there's a risk that it could expose something that's you know, that it shouldn't. There's you know, and that's kind of an interesting turn of the conversation. But I mean, for me, I think from a compliance point of view, from data privacy, I mean, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of just sort of you know, managing the data, understanding what it is, you know, understanding what it is, classifying it correctly. I mean, if you do all of that legwork as you're supposed to be doing to begin with, your AI should be able to kind of like notice the tags. Oh, this is private. This is classified, or this is public, and you should be able to steer through those things. But you know, like I feel like uh, those kinds of discussions often get kicked to the bottom of the chain and of priority. It's like you've got 15 terabytes of old documents out there on your corporate hard drive. I don't think anybody I'm skeptical. Let's just say it like that.
Mhm.
I'm skeptical that that those sort of compliance issues are being managed properly. So I'd be skeptical to turn an AI agent loose willy-nilly over the top of all of that.
Mm. And how about Daniel for bullets? I mean, bullets again, huge data pool of PII data, I would imagine. And how would you balance using an AI for the greater good of being able to analyze that data, but also keeping in line with GDPR?
Yeah. So for us, we're trying to be very careful when it comes to actual customer data. So we're generalizing AI in a very in a very basic way when it comes to analyzing some of the actual PII. And really, it's not even analyzing. We're primarily using it for operational efficiencies, where we're not really tapping into the actual PII. It's more related to, let's say, scheduling efficiencies and similar. It's really less what we're storing about what the learners do from a learning progress or whatnot perspective. So it's we're trying to be very careful, certainly complying with what's out there. I think that's a key topic. What's confidential, what's not. We generally don't have any sensitive information in the first place, so it's a little bit easier, but obviously not without any risk. I think the bigger risk, though, for many organizations when it comes to AI and personal data or company data is where you have some shadow IT areas, perhaps, or even like a basic user that may feed internal documents into an externally available freemium. And all of a sudden, you don't know where information comes from, where information goes. And I think the regulation of that's still a little bit more trickier than actually running the models across possibly available internal data. So I think there's some, testing the agents. I think training the agents, I think, is much more relevant in our area, especially as we're looking to bring some of these, not just in the security and compliance area, when it comes to internal risk, when it comes to the IT risk and the operational risk associated with any of that, but also for the more broader adoption across the enterprise as a whole.
I just want to come in there.
Go.
I think it comes back again to the age-old controls been using, since IT came to age and been implemented in businesses, access controls and change management. So wherever these modules are being hosted, whether you're using, some internally developed model, or you're using like an AWS Bedrock or a GCP equivalent or an OpenAI or whatever, it's all about who has access to these modules, and where they're hosted. So, for example, if you are using, I'm just going to use AWS Bedrock. AWS complies with GDPR. So you know that when you use AWS Bedrock and there might be some usage of PII, they comply with GDPR and it's kept safe in terms of what the regulation says. But if people are starting to use open source tools and putting details in there, that's obviously then becoming a red flag, because you don't know, first of all, what they're putting in and what's happening with this data. So the biggest risk for me, even with AI, it always comes back to people. People need to be educated on AI. People need to understand the impacts of AI. Especially when they're working in a business where they might be in a position and a role where they deal with, PII, or they have access to PII. Access reviews might become more frequent. Instead of doing quarterly user access reviews, do them monthly now on these roles that are dealing with AI modules to ensure that their access stays correct or someone didn't make a mistake when giving access. So the point I'm trying to make is it all comes back to age-old controls we've been using up until now and applying them to whatever AI tool you are using.
I smirked a little bit earlier because, yes, but that they comply with GDPR, but I've been busy writing a series of articles on LinkedIn about GDPR and NIS2 compliance throughout Europe. And there were some people who said, oh yes, but we don't care about this regulation because the EU never gives any fines anyway. And I'm like, well, actually, they do. And so I've been giving examples for each country. I've been giving examples of where there were GDPR fines handed out. So in one case, there was a huge supermarket chain in a country who did have the GDPR policies in place, but were still not complying. They were sharing their customer data with other parties willy-nilly, basically. So that's perhaps for another webinar. I see we have a question here, which I wanted you guys to dive a little bit into. It says here, when you're adding the data into an AI tool, how would you be assured that the data isn't in an external environment outside the business network for predictive analysis or risks? So I guess this goes a little bit back to what you were saying, Wesley, about AWS. But let's hear what you guys have to say about that. How would you be assured that the data isn't in an external environment, like what happened in that GDPR supermarket example I gave?
I want to pose this to my colleagues because they obviously have of their own. So before I give my insights, I don't know, maybe Brett, Daniel, you guys want to maybe take your views on that?
Sure. I mean, there's there's obviously a number of ways to prevent data getting fed into external models or AI tools, grabbing data out of your environment, right? I mean, starting with some of these freemium tools that are available, I think they're quite a risk. Sometimes as simple as when individuals bring these freemium video recording or these video meeting recording tools, that they get their own summary instead of what's available. We use internally in our end Microsoft Copilot, and that's the authorized tool for us to record, to do a summary, and all that, but not any of these other publicly available tools. So that's where, as simple as it starts, getting the internal information. There may be a P&L review, there may be a user onboarding review or whatnot, that this information does not sit elsewhere where you may not know, where you're unable to perhaps request a deletion of your data, because in some cases, it may be internal, confidential corporate information, and other ends it may be actual user information potentially. So there's always a risk. I think it's something that starts with user education, first and foremost, the ongoing training, whether that be monthly or quarterly. I think that's very critical. The awareness. I think a lot of people don't know what they don't know, and therefore they just do something. But then at the same time, while the person behind the keyboard introduces a lot of the risk on an ongoing basis, it's also what else may be brought into the environment through, let's call it shadow IT groups, whether that be sitting in IT, in the business, in marketing, or anywhere else. I think it's it's quite concerning, of what could be happening. So anyhow, starting with the awareness training, ongoing refining that, then obviously policies, procedures around it. We're currently in the process of modeling an updated policy around some of those, because these things evolve very quickly right now. I mean, between last summer or last fall going into this year. So if we look at the last 12 months, I think the next 12 months will even evolving even quicker than the last 12. And I think there's a significant risk, in the data loss prevention. It's one of these also, because the question, I believe, goes into that, at least if I'm interpreting it properly. The data loss prevention aspect feeds directly into this. And, at the core, it's nothing new. It just evolves rather rapidly. Previously you could lock down your OneDrive, so you can't share OneDrive information outside the organization. Well, now, a lot of this, you may be able to do with, literally a click by copy and paste potentially, or bringing some other, freemium tools in, not even freemium or even paid tools, if somebody pays for that, whether that be personally or through the, let's say expense reporting. and brings in and analyzes data, and you really don't know where it may be sitting. And at the core, on the corporate global level, we're looking to blog as much as possible and go through an authorization process in order to keep tabs on our data. Where it sits, where's the residency, who has access, ongoing access controls. Wesley, you were just saying, the refining from annual, semi-annual, quarterly down to monthly access review. Refining the ongoing, profiles and roles and permissions. Has something changed? Potentially that was perhaps happening outside of change management process. And years ago, this had to be reviewed manually by somebody, correlating it to what is it now in the system versus what it was. And you can all automate that and then just essentially deal with the output, with the discrepancies, whether there be any changes in what those changes may be.
So basically use a ring-fenced version of AI. You mentioned you guys use pilots, are using something that's within your Microsoft environment already. And
Yes.
of course now it's in my DNA. Of course, we actually have another solution at Elasticito, which auto enforces the policies that you have in place for your Microsoft AD environment. But anyway, it's in my DNA. I can't help myself. Sorry, guys. Brett, what about you? How would you be assured that the data isn't in an external environment when you're using it for predictive analysis? And I'm sorry, guys, I just need to mention we're 3 minutes off from the end of the webinar. So,
Oh, wow. Okay.
final words.
Yeah. I was listening to Daniel's excellent answer about that, and I was thinking again about data governance. I think a lot of it comes down to sort of education, but also, if you do the hard work to try and properly govern the data and classify things, it will be easier for people to know what's possible, what should and shouldn't be shared externally. I mean, I think it's very difficult to prevent people from copy pasting documents into, like a paid GPT or something like that. Very difficult to prevent that. And it's something that, that a lot of people are talking about right now. I haven't heard any good answers, but education and sort of, just keeping people informed and helping them to understand, what the risks are. Because, if somebody's risking, PII data on a public tool, then yeah, the whole company can suffer, and that has really serious consequences. I think people fundamentally don't want to damage the company; they want to support the company. So, it's a lot about educating and kind of keeping track of those things. Yeah, I don't think that adds much to the conversation, but that's just my take on it.
No, thank you so much. I'm being told off. We didn't have 3 minutes left, but anyway, I think we can round it off. Anyway, thank you so much, guys, for joining us. Is there anything else you would like to add before we finish today's webinar? Nope,
Yeah.
no further questions from the Q&A. Okay.
I want to
Fantastic.
say
Yeah.
people should try to remember the other AI, actual intelligence.
Love that. Love that. Okay. Thank you so much, Wesley, Brett, and Daniel, for joining me on this webinar today. I really, truly appreciate it. And thank you so much.
Right. Thanks very
Thanks,
much.
Isabella.
You're
Thanks,
welcome.
guys.
Everyone watching, thank you so much for joining us. And if you have any more questions, drop me a DM on LinkedIn or check out CITO's resources for a head start on continuous compliance. Please also check out the websites of Cab Online and Berlitz. Let's keep this conversation going. Stay curious and stay compliant. Until next time.